under Taliban rule, women are oppressed. They have no basic human rights. They have no fundamental rights. They have to go outside. When they go outside of their house, they need a male chaperone. They are predominantly not allowed to play sport. They're only allowed to be involved in certain professions. And I'm reading now about female doctors might be able to still practice in Afghanistan. But when it comes to sport, that's frowned upon by the Taliban and the new regime that's in control in Afghanistan. And in fact, high-profile athletes, people who were advocates for either human rights or women's sport, have been at extreme risk and really terrified. And that's why very quickly this global movement mobilized to help the Afghan women's national team, to help the Paralympians, and Zaki in particular, who's the Afghani first female Paralympian, which was wonderful that she was able to compete in Afghanistan with a huge contribution from the Australian government. And that's why so many of us felt impassioned about helping predominantly women get out of the country. It just so happened that a large cohort of that were women athletes, because we had this advocacy group came together very quickly around the world, but it wasn't exclusively athletes. Many Australian MPs and people here have been advocating on behalf of a protection for women across the whole gamut of Afghan society. All of us felt very strongly about women's rights, gender equality. We've been working on that for a long time here in Australia in sport, and to see that really brave, courageous female footballers and Paralympians and others were now going to be put at risk simply because they're exercising their human right to play sport, like all of us. We became really impassioned to help when these athletes were actually at the airport and in extreme risk, with Taliban forces around and others. I must say it's a wonderful story, through sport. It demonstrates what sport can do when we mobilize, good people and organizations around the world. But at the same time, there's no sense of triumphalism or great exultation, because so many people are still at extreme risk. An important point about the rescue operation of Afghan athletes in particular is that it was predominantly former athletes who stood up for them, who worked day and night to mobilize them, to organize them, to move them, and to move governments. That's really important, but it shouldn't be enough. There has been some really good work from certainly player unions like FIFPro, but that would be expected. But from governing bodies of sport around the world, I don't think they've done enough. And once again, many athletes have come together and shown governing bodies the way forward. I'd like to see FIFA, I'd like to see IOC and others be much more vocal when it comes to these issues. And when it comes to human rights and sustainable planet and these issues, they're not political. They are politicized. Oh yes, they're very deeply politicized, but they are objective, immutable human rights that we all possess, and we should all be comfortable speaking up about them, irrespective of whether we're in sport or otherwise. I do believe in the power of sport to bring social change. I've been delighted to see, for instance, the English national football team, both male and female, taking a knee, talking about racial equality. Raheem Sterling's been very strong. I'm aggrieved to see what happened in the England-Hungary match. I think these issues are incredibly important and can be amplified through sport. And football, of course, is the biggest game in the world. And we have the power to make the most change. I don't quite know why so many people in football, particularly contemporary players, feel unable or unwilling to speak out on a range of social issues. We see basketballers, African-American basketballers in the NBA and WNBA. We see Colin Kaepernick, we see Megan Rapinoe, we see US athletes making huge strides forward in this regard. In the Australian context, I'm hoping that the rescue of so many female Afghanistan athletes, particularly the Afghanistan national women's football team, can be transformative in our whole discussion about refugees. It's a very, very powerful moment for the refugee sector in Australia, and I hope around the world what's gone on in Afghanistan, because for the first time since perhaps the Iraq War in 1991 and Vietnam War prior to that, Australia is deeply involved in this situation in Afghanistan. We were there as one of the forces on the ground for nearly 20 years. We've been involved in the largely failed evacuation, and Australians feel a lot of guilt and a deep responsibility to help Afghanis because we were involved in it, and that's really important. In modern times, I don't think Australia in a refugee context has felt so deeply impassioned and involved.